BS in Mathematics magna cum laude from the University of San Carlos as a full science talent scholar. She undertook enhancement courses at UNDP, PIDS postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Washington in Seattle, USA. And she is a Gawid awardee of the Philippine Agricultural Economics and Development Association and an Alumni Association awardee of the University of San Carlos. She has worked full-time at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., at the World Bank Institute and the Wealth Accounting and Evaluation of Ecosystem Services Global Partnership, Senior Environmental Policy Economist at the World Agroforestry Center, Senior Research Fellow of PIDS, Assistant Professor at UPLB, Research Associate at DAP, and Senior Economist at NEDA. She led the Philippine Environmental and Natural Resources Project on a part-time basis for 10 years. So let us all welcome Dr. Ann de Los Angeles.
Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I will talk about Philippine Ecosystems and Natural Capital Accounting, or PENCAS as it is now called, and I will discuss briefly its evolution and the derivation of various sustainable development indices. Let's walk through the following topics. First, let's understand why there is a UN system of environment economic accounts, or SEA. And then we talk about how this developed into PENCAS, so a trek through time, a very brief trek. We will then walk through sustainable development indices and analyze the interpretation of such indices. These are at the central frameworks version at the aggregate and sectoral levels. We link also such findings with available social indicators in the regular system of national accounts. We will also look into examples of ecosystem services accounting. Then we have suggestions about moving forward. We are all familiar with this. This is a very basic circular flow of the economy. The goods and services are exchanged in return for payments for these goods and services. They are produced through various factors of production, and the actors or the stakeholders, economic stakeholders, are also indicated here. The economy is measured in two ways with this circular flows. First, you can measure gross domestic product through the factor income approach, where the payments to factors to production like rent to land, wages to labor, interest to capital owners, and profit for the entrepreneurs are indicated. All these result in a measure of the gross domestic product. Another way of doing the measurement is also indicated on the right-hand side. It is through the expenditure approach. How do people spend on consumption? What about expenditures for investments, that is for future production? Government also spends to produce public goods and services. And we also earn from exports as well as spend on imports. So the net would be indicated there. Having looked at that, we should also be mindful that the flows in that previous diagram do not explicitly indicate flows between the economy and the environment. So what we have now is the economic system, the gray part with the flows within, but we also have this economic system embedded in the environment. The natural environment includes various ecosystems. And the natural environment is where we get our goods and services for consumption and for non-consumption activities. And those goods and services have use values for us. They include provisioning for basic needs. That's food, fuel, water, and fiber or wood. They also include cultural service, like knowledge, spiritual values, and indigenous cultures values. Then we also have what we call nature's regulating services. Oops. Regulating functions of nature include the regulation of the hydrological functions through the water cycle. Rain falls to the ground, it gets absorbed by the plants, and then it gets evapotranspired and also disposed into water bodies and so on. So there's a circular relationship there among the components of the hydrological cycle. We also have nutrient cycling. Animals eat flora, and then some animals eat other animals. So you have the whole food web. There is also what you call support, habitat support, natural support, like how mangroves, the roots of mangroves provide filters, and it's a natural infrastructure that cushions the waves that reach the coast. Then we have the habitat where flora and fauna are located. These use values, particularly the provisioning services, are obtained through markets and therefore paid market prices. But the others don't have complete markets. For example, some of them, like the regulating functions, are embedded in the final goods and services that use these intermediate services. So they are not necessarily paid for, although the value of this, the contribution is embedded in the value of the final good. Other support functions like how the bees pollinate agricultural crops in order for such crops to have flowers and have fruits are not paid for. The value of the fruit is attributed to the agriculture sector, but the bees that don't necessarily come from that sector, they may come from the forest, and the forests are not compensated, so to speak, for such function. There are also what we call option values. Any of these used values now may be withheld from current use, and they could be postponed for future consumption. For that, we don't necessarily have a market that allows the present consumers and the future consumers to trade with each other. So the market is somehow there, but it's incomplete. Finally, we have the non-use values. Some people are happy that they know we have a monkey eating eagle, even if we don't see it. We're proud about it. We are proud about the existence. So it has use value for us. Altruism is in the form of us appreciating that other groups are dependent on nature, even if we don't really enjoy such dependence, but we appreciate that there is such interaction. And of course, all of us would like to bequeath part of nature to our future descendants. For those non-use values, there are no visible markets, but we will discover later on that there are ways of detecting them. Production and consumption do not necessarily complete the transformation of inputs into the final goods and services. There is always a byproduct of production and consumption. And these byproducts result in residuals into air, they are discharged into land and water. When they are at levels that are beyond the capacity of the environment to cleanse itself, then the residuals cause pollution. Some can be absorbed by the environment, and in which case the pollutant is just there and not harming anybody. Most of the time you have problems. So many of these relationships between the economy and the environment, ecosystems they're in, are not properly measured, and more important, not economically valuated. So there are therefore major issues in the way we measure GDP through the System of National Accounts, version 2008. As we all know, the SNA is a UN system guarded by the UN for countries to adhere to in terms of accounting principles, so that their estimates of the economy are credible and can be compared in a good way with the other countries. So it's important that there is an SNA. You all know that the SNA started during the Depression and eventually evolved through time, and the latest until this year is 208. This year there's a 2025 version. The estimate of the product GDP has the following problems. NDP is measured by subtracting from GDP the depreciation of produced capital or man-made capital. It is not yet subtracted with depreciation of natural capital or nature. Second, as Nobel Prize winner Stiglitz said, we should have more indicators than GDP. It's an indicator of flows. We don't judge a company solely on the basis of income statements. Companies use both income and balance sheets. The balance sheets show the stocks of assets and liabilities. So you always have flows and stocks. We don't do flows and stocks yet in most countries, but there's a beginning there, led by the World Bank. So GDP is only measuring the economy in a partial manner. It measures production and income, which are components of welfare, but not all of welfare. Welfare depends on other quality of life indicators like peace and others. All estimates are based on market transactions of goods and services and at market prices. The estimates come from receipts, records, and all that, and surveys by the Philippine Statistical Authority or PSA. So since the other services that we had in an earlier diagram are not in the market, they are therefore missed in the estimation of GDP. And these include climate regulation, natural infrastructure, and the like. Some of them are actually provided for free by nature to some extent. There is also another shortcoming of the way pollution is measured in the SNA. The damage to health from changes in the environmental quality are often there, but they are undervalued. And some cumulative effects are not always captured in the measurement. Because GDP is a year-to-year annual measure. Sometimes the effect is very long-term. So, and more recently, Sir Partha Dasgupta, a UK-based economist, in his book, The Economics of Biodiversity, emphasized that our economies, livelihoods, and well-being all depend on nature. And as said earlier, the depreciation of natural assets are not included in the regular measurement through the System of National Accounts. So having said that, we need to do natural capital accounting. First, we need to make all policymakers, not just natural resource manager, but also economic managers, politicians, aware of the value that is added by NCPA to address policy needs. If you don't have indicators from NCA, you do not necessarily appreciate the importance of nature. Also, traditionally, policy making has taken a silo approach. Even in DNR, there are bureaus like Mines and Geosciences Bureau, lands, forestry, ecosystems. And then for DA, there's agriculture, there's fisheries, aquaculture. The caretakers of these sectors and subsectors have their own measurement, measurements and indicators, and they barely have time to relate with each other. They don't think as systems. So even within DNR, the interactions among these sectors are limited and more so in terms of measurement and awareness. So it should be changed, therefore, this system. Placing environmental statistics, which had long been generated by many of these natural resource managers, but not in an accounting framework, is important because the usefulness is dramatically increased because of their credibilities. You have pluses and minuses, you have norms of accounting that need to be followed. So another last comment is that natural resources should be managed as part of the ecosystems and as part of biodiverse ecosystems. So many shortcomings. Therefore, the UN is a big agency. It has a UN statistical division, but it collaborates with its at the very minimum, its special groups like the IMF, the World Bank Group, and other groups. And it collaborates with academia. It listens to scholars who keep on commenting on how the UN could improve. So for a long time, there was the 1993 handbook. A handbook is not mandatory to follow. It's just an initial guide on accounting, on SEA. And a lot of debate happened for about 20 years until finally in 2021, yes, that's how long it takes for experts all over the world to finally agree about the norms, about the rules and the standards. The UN Statistical Commission, which consists of bigwigs from these agencies and representatives from well-respected accounting bodies, including the Philippine Statistical Authority, regularly meets and discusses the improvements or the problems with suggestions from academia and other practitioners. So finally, they approved the 2012 statistical standard. On the aside, there was a complaint that the approved statistical standard still did not look at ecosystems in a synergistic way. So there was a set of suggested methodology in what was called the experimental version of ecosystem accounting. That's the 2013 experimental version. And again, many practitioners from all over the world, from independent groups, from academia, and even from within government agencies, came up with their own methods, discussed. About 1,000 or so experts got together, very regularly debated, quarreled, befriended each other, and all the like. And these experts include economists, ecologists, geologists, natural scientists, and political economists as well. And finally, it took a little bit shorter time for the 2021 statistical standard to be approved. Having said that, let's look at what the difference is between these two prescribed methodologies. The first one has to do with what is called the central framework. The idea is to come up with a supplemental set of accounts, now called satellite accounts, not to interfere too much with the SNA. The SNA remains as it is. But let's have another information system to analyze together with the SNA indicators. And the first information system, central framework, tackles measures of environmental assets and individual resources and how they are used in the economy. Most of these are tangible, measurable commodities and services. For example, timber from forests, water from water bodies, whether underground or surface, fish from capture or from culture, soil, which yields us agriculture, and minerals, whether in the ground or underwater. these can be detected and can be measured and are in the SNA, but they need to be measured better. The other parallel effort is ecosystem accounting, where the measures are on the ecosystems. So in the timber, the trees for timber are found in forests. And the forest is an ecosystem that consists of many elements, flora, fauna, the land, the canopy, and algae, and all that. So you need to treat that as an ecosystem. One component affects the other. Similarly, rivers, coral reefs, part of a marine ecosystem, which interacts with seagrasses, seaweeds, and mangrove ecosystems. Wetlands include mangroves and lakes and the like. These ecosystems also interact with each other. What happens in the terrestrial area goes eventually into the marine through the seascape. And so there are all kinds of interactions that happen. So you can imagine that this involves a lot more work. It involves a lot more collaboration. And so this parallel work is not necessarily cut for the national statisticians, most of whom are economists, and most more than economists, more economic statisticians. So the natural scientists and the others are at DNR and the other agencies. So these are the ones who take into account ecosystem accounting practices. Altogether, they should both comprise the SEEA. How did we do in implementing this? We looked into the components of the SNA, and they are enumerated here. I will not read all of them. And the satellite natural capital accounts, it's now easier to mention. Instead of SCA, we just say NCA, consists of the central framework and the ecosystem accounts. And these are what you do. With the central framework, you usually look at the stocks, what is there, the flows, what happens to the stocks during a certain period of time, and then what happens at the end of a certain period of time. There are also expenditures that need to be tracked for nature and for protection against environmental insult. And there can also be subsidies that are already paid out to assist or provide finances to conservation activities. The EA, Ecosystem Accounting, or sometimes we call it ESA, Ecosystem Services Accounting, has core accounts that measure the extent of what ecosystem you're talking about. So maybe if it's coastal waters, then you have 15 kilometers from the shore, the area covering that. So that's the extent. The condition is it polluted? Is it full of fish? Is it full of algae? So you talk about the quality of that ecosystem. And within a particular ecosystem, you may have several assets from which you may have several services. So for example, coral reefs can be hosts of various fish and other products, mussels and the like, but they are also alive and they grow. And they, as well as the seagrasses and the mangroves, interact to protect very strong impact of waves in the sea, into the seashore. So there are always all kinds of interactions. There is also what we call thematic interest vis-a-vis ecosystem accounts, such as what is carbon sequestration and storage that is provided by such living creatures, particularly the flora. About water, it's another resource that is getting scarce. And what about biodiverse landscapes and seascapes? Biodiversity is a characteristic. It is not a service, but that characteristic defines partly how that landscape or seascape provides other kinds of services. So we are also interested in the flows. As I mentioned, these are the flows. What did we do in the Philippines? We were lucky that we became part of as the starting point in the 1990s. So this is very busy because we have really been very busy, but not in a very visible way. I led the 1991 to 2000 Environmental and Natural Resource Accounting Project of DNR. I was lent by PIDS to that team. And then as we went through it, we worked with the Philippine Statistical Authority, among others, including DNR. And then they were enjoined by the UN to start experimenting with the 1993 handbook. So we were all experimenting or trying hard what it takes to do accounting work. And several things arose from that during these years. We were among the early starters, and our national accountants were always in the international discussions. So that evolved, and so on and so forth. Eventually, there was a revival in the year 2000. You know of Rio, no? Rio was 1992. Rio plus 10 was coming up. And always the international community wants something to launch, important thing to launch. So they were thinking about launching the approved SEEA. So we were part of that. What the PSA did was to decide on the central framework, easier, more doable for them, and very important for the macroeconomic planning, the sectors that are fed by the different natural resources. So they have produced the energy accounts, mineral accounts, water accounts. I will show some of the results later on. Material flow accounts, and the Compendium of Philippine Environment Statistics has to do with pollution and the like. And so a lot of work on and off, because the funding was not very regular. It was not necessarily coming from the government. It depended largely on external funding. Very many UN agencies helped out. And more important, the bilateral USAID continued to help out. Finally, we all complained it should not be a stopgap thing. It's something that should be regularly done because we learned a lot from them. And everything, the stars aligned. Finally, last year, Senator Lauren Legarda, who kept on trying to legally come up with the instrument, following the President Ramos's executive order in 1999 or 2000, came up with the PENCAS Act after about a year of deliberation and several appearances in Congress by scientists, myself, colleagues, NGOs in particular, got together and the PENCAS Act of 2024 was approved. Recently, the implementing rules and regulations were approved, and eventually there'll be a bulletin or a newspaper item on it. So in the meantime, the Philippine Statistical Authority came out with the Philippine Ocean Economy Satellite Accounts. They started in a lot earlier, but they have a very recent publication that you should all look into. We, RICS and the academic community with whom we work through development projects and policy analysis and action research, decided to focus on ecosystem services accounting because government needed a lot more help there than in the central framework. So we had that culminated the methodology that we worked with together with non-economic groups like the conservation initiatives of the Philippines Center, ecologists. It came out of Flora and Fauna International, the Zoological Society of London, ZSL, and the like, got together to come up with methodologies that would address what is called high conservation value areas. These are mostly the protected areas because these are very widely missed. In fact, when Australia, for example, tried to do its land accounting years ago, they realized that most of their PAs were zero value, no markets except for the Great Barrier Reef. So all the more is there's a need to do ecosystem services accounting. We came up with a book called Sukat ng Kalikasan last year, and the National Academy of Sciences awarded us one of the book awards. And so we are now implementing that as well. So there are many indicators that come out of such accounts. From the SEA, you always have the biophysical indicators, stocks during the beginning of a period, changes during the period, stats at the end of the period. Accounting talaga. Now, plus and minus during a period, the result at the end of the period. And then that's in biophysical terms, we now have to value those in economic terms to arrive at estimates of appreciation or depreciation if the asset goes up in value and physically. We also needed to look into economic valuation of non-market ecosystem services based on the second statistical standard on ecosystem services accounting. We started with pilot sites which are prioritized in what the NEDA, PSA, and DNR came up, what is called the NCA roadmap from 2022 to 2040. There's a list there of priority PAs to do valuation. You also need to look into pollution damage. It is embedded somehow in the national accounts, but these need to be disentangled because policy making on pollution control needs to look at the benefits of pollution control and the cost of pollution control. And therefore, you need to decompose it from where it is embedded in the SNA. We also need to look into environmental protection expenditures in more detail. The World Bank, always leading in thought, started working on wealth. And you know of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. So what the World Bank did was start with, where is the wealth of nations? And much earlier than 2024. Since then, the various years, they had the changing wealth of nations. And each of the issues tackled all these, as well as the methodological improvements on a year-to-year basis and looking into themes. Wait, I'm only halfway through. Okay. So what are some of these indicators? Percent of flows to GDP, that's always important from natural resource-based economies or sectors. Trends in physical indicators versus GDP. There is such a thing as the environmental Kuznets curve, which is really just pollution measured in biophysical terms divided by GDP. And resource intensity can also be measured that way. Number of endangered species can also measure in that kind of composite indicator. There is what you call a hypothesis that countries usually exhibit the inverted U curve. So Kuznets curve, if you remember, has to do with development through time. And U mean things get worse first in terms of maybe poverty and before it gets better. And this was also seen in some countries, but not all. So that can be perhaps an undergraduate thesis for some of you. We also need to bear in mind that the use of the accounts are important, but they should not be used in isolation. They should be used in tandem with the other indicators generated by the SNA, and I have an example on that. Then for ecosystem services accounting, these have to be geo-referenced. this is, after all, analysis of space. So it's subnational, it's ecosystem-based. And so there's a lot more work to do there. Why do we do this? We need them for fiscal policy, to inform allocation of expenditures, to inform instruments to capture economic value, maybe through taxes and all these things. So globally, we are somewhere here, and it kasi natin, no? So it doesn't show that it's yellow. So countries have been looked into in terms of how their wealth has changed per capita through time, and we fall under this range of 1 to 50% change through time, and the others are like so. Okay, so the wealth of nations are indicated here, and these are just examples. There's 18 years of data which you can mine. The data is available publicly. Challenges for wealth accounting. What are the economic questions? How much should we save for the future? Which means how much should we consume now? There are trade-offs. What is the composition of our assets? Natural, human, economic, social capital should be here too. And on natural capital, how should we sustain the benefits throughout generations? Very important economic questions. How did we fare as a nation? Here is our natural capital and National Comprehensive Wealth Index. So the index shows a decline, not very good. This is the actual value in $1 billion, and the actual value consists of human capital, renewable natural resources capital, produced capital, including urban land, non-renewables, the black line, and net foreign assets, near zero because of our indebtedness. So that itself already has some implications. We have to be mindful, though, that we are still not able to measure a lot of things. Okay. Oops. This one is how the breakdown is between renewables and non-renewables. Bear in mind that the scale here is 1/10 for the non-renewables, and it is, well, more or 10 times this for the renewables. What are in the renewables? And measured in Turnquist real terms. I will explain Turnquist later. There are mangroves there. The largest part is agricultural land. And then the others are nag-umpukan in the lower level, okay? Because many things are not yet measured, although there are attempts to do so. For the non-renewables, you have gas, oil, coal, and the minerals, chromite, copper, gold, silver, and nickel. We are not able to measure the non-metallics yet. And we are not able to measure rare earth metals. We are not doing assays on the ores yet. So we don't know what we have. This one is a digression that tells us that we should not just use current values, and even in constant terms, particularly for those sectors where the fluctuation of prices are considerable in the market. Mineral prices go up and down with political instability. When there's a war, people turn to gold, copper is more demanded, and so on. When there's no war, the prices go down. And some of these ups and downs disturb the way we compute for natural resource depreciation and appreciation. So the World Bank invented what is called a Turnquist chain approach to correcting for this. Okay, and so this one is when it's in current $1 billion. Here when it is adjusted for those fluctuations, and this is more smooth, so to speak. Mineral resources are a case of interest because they are non-renewable, A, and B, they tend to be destructive, at least the surface mining activities. And so the question is, can we benefit from mining? And we looked at the Gini ratios in the 43 companies that we reviewed a few years ago for the Mining Industry Coordinating Council. And wow, the starting points are very high income inequality. Indeed, mining areas are in the hinterlands where people are poor. And then at the beginning, inequality rose. And then eventually they went down. That's good news, right? You have a similar situation here, although it varies from area to one area to the other. There's a decrease in the Gini coefficient. That's good news. Wait, there is bad news. The decrease has not gone far enough so that the average Gini ratio for the country has been reached. These areas are still much more unequal than the rest of the economy. So it's still a cause of concern. Here is forest wealth, and what this shows is forest timber values are lower than all the other values added together. Partly because we are no longer at the era where we're exporting a lot of timber because we have degraded forest lands, and we actually import our wood, consumed wood most of the time. Here is an important economic measure for all of us. Consider when you save, you are saving for at least two reasons. One, you are saving because you want to improve in the future. Two, that means that you can improve through some capital expenditures, or if you're a company, you will finance investments that make it more productive in the future. You also save for the rainy day. Okay? So saving is an indicator of future possibilities. And but the World Bank mentioned try to adjust savings. Adjusted net savings or genuine savings comes from first saving from the SNA adjusted for the depreciation of fixed capital. That's still from the SNA. So you end up with downward number. And then you can add to that educational expenditures because when you spend on your education, you are investing in yourself to have higher income in the future. So that's a positive adjustment. Now, if your estimation of natural capital depreciation gives you depreciation, then you adjust downward in demand. And if you have pollution, you still adjust downward and so on. So genuine savings or adjusted net saving measures sustainability, how it moves through time. Not too many of us are using this yet. How did the rest of the world fare? For a long time, you have these colorful trend lines, and the worrisome region is sub-Saharan Africa.